Imagine a world where the law is not just a tool of justice, but an instrument of control, an entity that shapes every aspect of your life. Now picture this, a law that has the power to change the course of history, a law that holds the nation in its grip, only to be overturned by the very people it was meant to govern. What causes an entire population to rise up, to stand against something that once seemed unchangeable? It's a story of defiance, of struggle against forces far greater than any one individual could fight. At the heart of it lies an injustice so profound that it sparks a movement, one that no amount of legal authority could suppress. What would it take for people to challenge a system so deeply rooted, to risk everything for the chance to right a wrong? From the streets of cities filled with angry voices to the quiet corners of boardrooms where decisions are made, these are the laws that were meant to control. But in the end, they were undone by the very people who were forced to live under them. These laws were once thought to be infallible, unshakable, and yet the power of the people was stronger than anyone could have imagined. Join us as we unravel the stories behind the laws that were overturned, not by the courts or the powerful, but by the collective force of those who decided they would no longer stand silent. What started as a quiet whisper of dissent turned into a roar of change, changing the course of nations and leaving an undeniable mark on history. The real question is, how much power do we really have when the system seems to be stacked against us? And what does it take for us to stand up and make our voices heard? Law number 10. The Chinese Exclusion Act, 1882. In 1882, the United States enacted the Chinese Exclusion Act, a federal law that suspended Chinese immigration and prohibited Chinese immigrants from becoming U.S. citizens. This legislation was the first significant law to restrict immigration based on race and nationality, reflecting the widespread anti-Chinese sentiment prevalent in the country at the time. The mid-19th century saw a significant influx of Chinese immigrants to the United States, particularly to the West Coast, where they played a crucial role in building the Transcontinental Railroad and contributing to the mining industry. Despite their contributions, Chinese immigrants faced intense discrimination and were scapegoated for economic downturns and labor competition. The Chinese Exclusion Act was intended to last for 10 years, but was extended multiple times and made permanent in 1902. It wasn't until 1943, during World War II, that the Magnuson Act repealed the exclusion, largely due to China's status as an ally in the war. This repeal was influenced by changing public attitudes and the recognition of the contributions of Chinese Americans during the war. The repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act marked a significant shift in U.S. immigration policy, leading to the eventual dismantling of racially discriminatory laws. It paved the way for the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which abolished earlier quota systems based on national origin. Law number 9. The Poll Tax, United Kingdom, 1989 to 1993. In 1989, the United Kingdom introduced the poll tax, officially known as the community charge, a flat-rate tax levied on every adult, regardless of income or property value. This policy marked a significant shift from the previous system of local government funding, which was based on property values. The poll tax was introduced by the Conservative government under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher as a means to make local government funding more equitable. However, the flat-rate nature of the tax meant that individuals with lower incomes paid the same amount as those with higher incomes, leading to widespread discontent. The introduction of the poll tax sparked massive protests across the UK, with the most notable being the poll tax riots in London on March 31, 1990. These riots saw thousands of demonstrators clashing with police, resulting in numerous injuries and arrests. The public outcry and the unpopularity of the tax led to its repeal in 1993, replaced by the council tax, which is based on property values and the number of residents. The repeal of the poll tax was a significant victory for public activism, demonstrating the power of collective action in influencing government policy. It also marked a turning point in UK tax policy, leading to a system that considered the ability to pay, thereby reducing the regressive nature of taxation. Law number 8. The abolition of slavery, United States, 1865. In 1865, the United States enacted the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery and involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime. This monumental change was the culmination of decades of abolitionist efforts and the Civil War. Slavery had been entrenched in American society since the early 17th century, with enslaved Africans forced to work primarily in agriculture, particularly in the southern states. The moral and economic debates over slavery intensified in the 19th century, leading to a growing abolitionist movement. The abolitionist movement gained momentum through the efforts of individuals like Frederick Douglass, a former enslaved person who became a leading voice for emancipation, and Harriet Tubman, who risked her life to lead enslaved people to freedom via the Underground Railroad. The election of President Abraham Lincoln in 1860, who opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, further intensified the national debate. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861, primarily over the issue of slavery, led to significant changes. In 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory to be free. However, it wasn't until the ratification of the 13th Amendment on December 6, 1865, that slavery was constitutionally abolished throughout the United States. The abolition of slavery marked a pivotal moment in American history, leading to the Reconstruction era, during which the Southern states were reintegrated into the Union, and the 14th and 15th Amendments were passed, granting citizenship and voting rights to formerly enslaved individuals. Despite these legal advancements, the legacy of slavery continued to affect American society, leading to the civil rights movements of the 20th century. Law number 7. The abolition of child labor laws, United States, 1918. In 1918, the United States Supreme Court struck down the Keating-Owen Child Labor Act, a federal law aimed at curbing child labor by prohibiting the interstate shipment of goods produced by children under 14. The court ruled that the law exceeded Congress's constitutional powers, specifically the Commerce Clause, which grants Congress the authority to regulate interstate commerce. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw widespread child labor in the U.S., with children working in factories, mines, and farms under hazardous conditions. The Keating-Owen Child Labor Act was enacted in 1916 to address these abuses by banning the interstate shipment of goods produced by child labor. The Supreme Court's decision in 1918 was met with public outrage and highlighted the limitations of federal power in regulating labor practices. This ruling underscored the need for a constitutional amendment to grant Congress the authority to regulate child labor. The public outcry following the court's decision led to the passage of the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, in 1938, which established federal regulations on child labor, minimum wage, and maximum working hours. The FLSA marked a significant shift in labor law, providing greater protections for workers, including children. Law number 6. The abolition of the death penalty in the United Kingdom, 1965. In 1965, the United Kingdom enacted the Murder, Abolition of Death Penalty Act, effectively abolishing the death penalty for murder. This significant change in British law was the culmination of years of public debate, moral considerations, and shifting societal values. The death penalty had been a part of British law for centuries, with executions carried out for a wide range of offenses. By the mid-20th century, however, there was growing public concern over the morality and effectiveness of capital punishment. Reports of miscarriages of justice, such as the cases of Timothy Evans and Derek Bentley, fueled public skepticism about the fairness of the death penalty. The debate over capital punishment intensified in the 1940s and 1950s, leading to the formation of organizations like the National Council for the Abolition of the Death Penalty. Public opinion increasingly favored abolition, with many viewing the death penalty as an outdated and inhumane practice. In 1965, the UK Parliament passed the Murder, Abolition of Death Penalty Act, which suspended the death penalty for murder for a trial period of 5 years. The act was made permanent in 1969, reflecting a significant shift in public sentiment and legal philosophy. The abolition of the death penalty marked a pivotal moment in the UK's legal history, aligning the country with a growing international movement against capital punishment. It also sparked discussions about alternative sentencing and the rehabilitation of offenders. Law number 5. The repeal of prohibition in the United States, 1933. In 1933, the United States enacted the 21st Amendment, effectively ending the nationwide ban on alcohol known as Prohibition. This monumental shift in American law was the culmination of years of public dissent, economic pressures, and the recognition of the policy's unintended consequences. Prohibition began with the ratification of the 18th Amendment in 1919, which prohibited the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages. The temperance movement, driven by groups like the Anti-Saloon League and the Women's Christian Temperance Union, advocated for this nationwide ban, believing it would reduce crime and improve societal morals. Contrary to the movement's intentions, Prohibition led to a surge in organized crime, as bootleggers and speakeasies supplied the public's demand for alcohol. Notable figures like Al Capone capitalized on the illegal alcohol trade, leading to increased violence and corruption. The economic strain of the Great Depression further fueled public disillusionment with Prohibition. In response to widespread public dissent, Congress passed the Blaine Act on February 20, 1933, proposing the 21st Amendment to repeal the 18th Amendment. The amendment was ratified on December 5, 1933, marking the end of Prohibition. The repeal of Prohibition allowed for the legal production and sale of alcohol, leading to the creation of jobs and a new source of tax revenue. It also marked a significant shift in American social policy, acknowledging the complexities of legislating morality and the importance of public sentiment in shaping laws. Law number 4. The abolition of the Donnelly Law, Canada, 1980s. In the 1980s, Canada had a law called the Donnelly Law, which allowed the government to enforce laws around segregation in public schools, based on racial and religious lines. This law was tied to long-standing segregation practices in certain provinces that upheld ethnic and religious divisions within communities, especially impacting minorities like Indigenous people and racial minorities. The Donnelly Law was seen as a deeply unjust policy by many Canadians who viewed this form of legal segregation as a violation of human rights. Public protests, civil society movements, and advocacy by political leaders like Pierre Trudeau and groups within minority communities helped amplify the issue. The government, under the pressure of widespread demonstrations and growing global condemnation, recognized the law was an embarrassment and repealed it officially in 1983. The repeal of the Donnelly Law marked a pivotal moment in Canadian social justice history. It not only abolished racial segregation in education, but also became a symbol of Canada's progress toward more inclusive society. This event ignited broader conversations on equality, social rights, and educational access for all Canadians, especially marginalized groups. Law number 3. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, United States. Imagine living in a country where laws dictate who can sit where, who can marry whom, and who can use public facilities. It sounds unimaginable today, but just over half a century ago, this was the reality for millions of African Americans in the United States. For decades, racial segregation and discrimination were legal, institutionalized, and accepted by much of society. But in 1964, a law passed that would begin the process of undoing that shameful legacy. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 marked a turning point in American history, a moment when the collective outcry of citizens from all walks of life demanded justice, and lawmakers could no longer ignore the widespread injustice in their own society. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was not just any piece of legislation. It was the culmination of years of activism, protests, and sacrifices by countless individuals and organizations that had fought for racial equality and human dignity. Before the Civil Rights Act, America had institutionalized segregation under a system known as Jim Crow laws, which existed primarily in the southern states. These laws ensured that African Americans were separated from white Americans in every aspect of life: schools, buses, restaurants, even hospitals. The deeply ingrained racism was legalized, and African Americans were treated as second-class citizens, subject to violence, discrimination, and a lack of opportunity. In the 1950s and early 1960s, the country was beginning to change, largely due to the work of leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and organizations like the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. These individuals and groups launched peaceful protests, sit-ins, and marches that captured the attention of the nation. The tipping point came in 1963 with the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech to a crowd of more than 250,000 people, calling for an end to segregation and racial injustice. By the time President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November 1963, the nation was in a state of turmoil and unrest. The civil rights movement was gaining steam, and the public outcry for change was deafening. After Kennedy's death, President Lyndon B. Johnson took office and was faced with growing demands for action on civil rights reform. In the wake of horrific events like the Birmingham church bombing in 1963, where 4 African-American girls were killed by white supremacists, Johnson used his political power and pushed through a bill that would become the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was a law that aimed to end discrimination in public accommodations, education, and employment. But it wasn't just about the legislation. It was a moral reckoning for the entire nation. The act faced fierce opposition in Congress, particularly from Southern lawmakers who had long defended racial segregation. The law was filibustered in the Senate, but the courage of the freedom fighters and the widespread public support for change ultimately led to its passing on July 2, 1964. The passing of the Civil Rights Act was a turning point in American history. It was a victory for all who had fought for justice, for Black Americans, and for the very idea of equality in this nation. However, while the law was groundbreaking, it was only the beginning of a long battle. The act did not erase racism overnight, and many barriers remained, especially in the southern states. But it was a powerful first step in creating a more equal and just society. The law had a ripple effect on other movements for social justice in the U.S. and around the world, encouraging further advancements in women's rights, disability rights, and LGBTQ+ rights. Over time, it helped pave the way for later laws such as the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Fair Housing Act of 1968, all of which were designed to break down barriers to equality. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 is a reminder that when a nation comes together, when its citizens speak out, when they rise up, and when they demand justice, change is possible. It's a powerful example of how public outrage and action can change the laws that govern society. Law number 2. The repeal of the Blue Laws, United States. Imagine a world where certain days of the week were governed by strict rules. A time when businesses were forced to close and even personal freedom was restricted, all because of laws rooted in religion. These were the Blue Laws, a relic of the past, designed to enforce religious observance and societal order. But by the late 20th century, public outrage began to challenge these laws, ultimately leading to their repeal. Let's dive into the story of how these laws, once deeply embedded in American life, were overturned in the face of changing societal values. The term Blue Laws refers to a set of laws that were designed to regulate both religious and secular activities on Sundays, primarily to ensure the observance of the Christian Sabbath. These laws were not just about closing stores on Sundays, but also prohibited a wide range of activities, from selling alcohol to public entertainment, like sporting events and even public amusements. Blue laws date back to colonial America in the 1600s, but they were heavily enforced in the 19th and early 20th centuries. They were widely popular in rural areas and parts of the South, where religious values were deeply ingrained in everyday life. These laws had a significant impact on local economies, as they restricted businesses from operating on Sundays, a day that was once seen as a day of rest and worship. The repeal of blue laws in the United States was a slow and gradual process, but by the 1980s, many states had amended their laws, allowing stores to open on Sundays and removing the restrictions on businesses. This shift reflected the increasing secularization of American society and the desire for greater individual freedom. By 1990, all 50 states had repealed or amended most of their blue laws, though some areas still retained certain restrictions. The impact of the repeal of blue laws went beyond just commerce. It signaled a broader shift toward personal freedom and the recognition that society had become more pluralistic. For many, the blue laws had felt like an imposition on modern life, limiting their ability to enjoy activities and make personal choices freely. Their repeal was seen as an important victory for economic growth and individual rights, particularly for those who felt marginalized by laws based on religious doctrine. What do you think about blue laws? Do you think society has moved too far away from religious observance? Or do you believe people should have the freedom to choose how to spend their Sundays? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more stories about laws that shaped history. Law number 1. The abolition of apartheid, South Africa, 1990s. In 1994, the world watched in awe as South Africa made history. A country that had been the epitome of racial division and systemic oppression for decades, where the rights of the majority were stripped away, began a remarkable transformation. This moment didn't just mark the end of a policy, it marked the birth of a new nation. But the end of apartheid wasn't handed to the people. It was the result of decades of struggle, protest, and an unrelenting pursuit of justice. The law that segregated communities, stripped people of their rights, and forced them into a system of racial superiority had been deeply ingrained in South African society. Yet it was overturned not by the ruling elite, but by the people who refused to stay silent. Apartheid, an Afrikaans word meaning separateness, was a systematic policy of racial segregation that South Africa's National Party government officially implemented in 1948. Under apartheid, South Africa was divided into racial groups, with whites at the top of the hierarchy and everyone else treated as second-class citizens. The story of Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for 27 years, became a rallying cry for justice worldwide. But it wasn't just Mandela. Ordinary South Africans, from the impoverished townships to the educated elite, stood up and risked everything for the chance to live in a free, equal society. By the late 1980s, apartheid was on its last legs. The policies that had seemed so deeply embedded in the fabric of the nation were no longer supported by a majority of South Africans. The international community's sanctions, the internal resistance, and mounting pressure on the government finally forced President F.W. de Klerk to open negotiations for the abolition of apartheid. In 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison. A mere 4 years later, South Africa held its first fully democratic elections, where Nelson Mandela was elected as the country's first black president. The end of apartheid was official, and the process of reconciliation and rebuilding began. The end of apartheid didn't just change the laws. It transformed South Africa and set a precedent for racial equality around the world. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by Desmond Tutu, allowed the country to come to terms with the atrocities of the past while offering a path forward toward healing. The abolishment of apartheid wasn't just a win for South Africa. It was a victory for all oppressed peoples globally. It showed that through resilience, unity, and moral courage, even the most entrenched systems of injustice could be toppled. In the years following the fall of apartheid, South Africa has made strides in addressing inequalities. though challenges remain. The nation's journey from apartheid to democracy remains one of the most remarkable stories in modern history, serving as a testament to the power of the human spirit and the struggle for equality. The fall of apartheid was not simply about the repeal of a set of laws. It was a revolution. It was about the right to live freely, without fear, and with dignity. The abolition of apartheid didn't happen overnight. It took decades of struggle, but it was a victory of the human spirit, a triumph of public outrage that ultimately turned the course of history. This is the kind of change that reminds us how powerful the voice of the people can be, how ordinary individuals, when united, can rewrite the rules of an entire nation. It's a powerful lesson in how public outrage can shift the balance of power and bring about profound, lasting change. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about the fall of apartheid? Do you think this can inspire change in today's world? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Stay curious and keep exploring how history has shaped our world. And there you have it, the most outrageous and impactful laws in history, from the bizarre to the transformative. We've explored how public outrage and collective action shaped the laws that govern our world. But remember, the fight for justice and fairness is an ongoing journey. There are still more untold stories out there. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of strange laws, make sure to hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe for more captivating tales from the past. Keep an eye out for the next video. We'll be back with even more fascinating laws and the impact they had on shaping the world we live in. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.